Okay, and we are recording. Good evening, families. Welcome to the Quincy Public Schools Parent Academy. This is for families that have children in grades K through 2. I just have a few announcements before we really get started here and dive into literacy. But first, I want to let you know that we'll have another session specifically for families that have children in grades 3 through 8, and that's going to be on January 14th. Towards the end of the meeting, I will put that flyer in the chat for you. And again, we are recording this session so that if any other families want to refer to that, or you want to refer to it later, it will be posted on the QPS website on our Parent Academies page. More importantly, I want to mention that we are having a book raffle tonight. So
更
I'm
重
going
要
to
嘅
put a
係我哋今晚會
form
有個 book raffle，
in the chat if
咁
you'd
咧
like
我
to
會
win
將呢
some
個擺喺
fun
我哋嘅
books
聊
for
天
your
框嗰
family.
度，
So if
所
someone
以
just needs to mute, let me just do that.
有人係需要關閉佢嘅呢個咪嘅。
So Sarah, let me see if it's someone else. Sorry about that. So let me put that book raffle in the chat for you now.
咁咧我就將我哋嘅呢一個 book raffle 擺喺我哋嘅聊天框嗰度。
Okay, so we're going to get started.
好
The
嘅，咁
topic
我
for
哋馬
this
上開
evening
始。
is supporting your child's
我哋
literacy
今晚
development.
嘅呢個會議係關於小朋友
And
嘅
we are
呢個
so
文
happy
學
to
度
have all
嘅
of you join us this
文學
evening
度
because
嘅
in the
發展，
Quincy Public
好高興
Schools,
大家可以
we
參
want
加
to
我哋
support
嘅呢一
you
個
and show
公
you
立
how you
Quincy
can help
公
your
立學
child on
校，
this incredible journey of learning
你
how
可以
to
幫
read.
助你嘅小朋友喺呢一
I'm going to
個旅
pause
程
for
呢
just a
度
moment.
學
We
習
need
如
to,
何閱讀。
you guys all hear that? Victoria, do you hear that in the
Victoria 係咪
translation?
可以聽到？
I heard
Do you
包
hear
括
it in
我哋
both
嘅呢個翻譯
languages?
嘅頻道，
I can't hear you.
聽唔到你講嘢，
just a little echo.
有少少
There's
回
an
音，
echo.
有啲回
Can't
音。
hear. Okay. Okay, give me just a moment. I also have our Spanish interpreter that has just joined us. So give me a moment. I'm going to set that up. Thank you for your patience. All right. Okay. So my name is Bridget Vaughan, and I'm the District Literacy Coordinator for the Quincy Public Schools. I work with all of the teachers and principals in Quincy, and there's a pretty good chance that I've met many of your wonderful children as I visit classes to see all the amazing things that are happening. I've been the literacy coordinator for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I was a teacher in the Quincy Public Schools. I'm also a college professor and I teach writing and children's literature. And in addition, I'm certified as an associate by the Academy of Orton Gillingham. So literacy is my passion. And on behalf of myself and all the educators that teach your children in the Quincy Public Schools, we want you to feel supported at home as your child is learning how to read. So after tonight, we want you to feel empowered and ready to try out many of the suggestions and tools that are offered. I know that many of you will be meeting your children's teachers either tomorrow or next week. So I hope you can chat about some of the things that you've learned here tonight. And with that, we are so pleased to bring Victoria Mulkern to you this evening. Victoria comes to us as a consultant for the National Council on Improving Literacy, or NCIL. She's a doctoral student in educational studies with a concentration in special education at Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. Victoria's research interests include supporting educators in implementing multi-tiered systems of support in reading to provide evidence-based literacy practices for all students, especially young multilingual learners who may be at risk for dyslexia and other word reading disabilities. Previously, Victoria served as the Director of Literacy and Title I in the Malden Public Schools, where she led an adoption and implementation of high-quality instructional curriculum grounded in reading science. And prior to that, she was a classroom teacher, an ESL specialist, and an instructional coach for the Boston Public Schools. More recently, Victoria provided training for many of our teachers on November 5th. And so now with that, I welcome Victoria and I will turn it over to her.
Thank you, Bridget, and it's great to be here with you all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So thank you so much. As Bridget mentioned, I was just in Quincy a few weeks ago providing some professional development to some of your wonderful teachers in your district. And so it's wonderful to be here to be speaking with you all tonight. And similarly to Bridget, literacy is my passion, and I, just love to support our caregivers and family members in supporting your own children with literacy development, and especially in the early childhood grades, because it is such an exciting and also important time in your child's life as they become readers. I am a consultant for the National Center on Improving Literacy, and our mission as a center, it's a federally funded center in collaboration with the Department of Education and Office of Special Education Programs. Our mission is to increase access to and use of evidence-based approaches to screen, identify, and teach students with literacy-related disabilities, including dyslexia. But it's not just that. We provide support, technical assistance, training, and just resources for all literacy, for all students, including our students, who are doing great with literacy. So that's why we're here today, and just how we promote literacy, love of literacy, and also support for literacy development for our youngest children. So tonight we're just going to talk about some evidence-based practices that you all can know to increase your child's literacy development, and some kind of easy, no prep, no tool ideas for how you can support your children in improving their language and literacy growth, such as by engaging in conversations with them, by helping them recognize different speech sounds or how our speech connects to print, reading together with your child, helping your child kind of comprehend what you're reading, to understand what you're reading about together, and finally, in supporting your child in becoming fluent readers. And we'll try to leave some time for a Q&A at the end if you have any questions. So again, we're going to start off with tips and strategies to talk with your child and engage in oral language. And oral language is the cornerstone of early literacy skills. Talking with your child helps them learn about letters and letter sounds, learn new words and ideas, practice hearing and saying words, and practice talking back and forth with you or anybody else. And when it comes to oral language in young children, more is always better. The quantity of input they're getting is always going to be beneficial for them in any language you speak. Because we know from research that literacy and oral language in one language directly correlates to literacy in another language. So I always want to say that up in front. So when we're talking about oral language and engaging in conversations, that's in any language with your child. And we can think of oral language and engaging in conversations as related to reading and writing. They're all subdomains of just language. And we can think of oral language as just kind of almost like a training wheels for getting our children ready for reading and writing. Because just as, we're getting them ready to ride a bike, that's kind of how we're engaging in oral language with our children. We're framing our conversations with them. We're using vocabulary with them and sentence structures with them that they're ultimately going to see when they're reading books and when they're writing. And so we're building that muscle. And so therefore we promote talking with your child all the time, telling them what you're thinking, engaging them in your own self-thought, engaging with them in pretend play when they're playing, dress up, or they're engaged in around the house, different pretend games. You can ask them what they're doing, extend their conversation. Talk about the items you're seeing when you're going to a store or a grocery store, or point out signs that you're seeing when you're taking the bus with your children or taking the T, talking to them about the journeys you're going to have. And even, playing word games, which is some of my favorite things, such as rhyming games with students, talking about letters and how you can create stories together. We also, when we're talking with your child, you can think about the types of conversations you're having with them in terms of thin versus thick conversation. Thin conversations are a quick, direct, you ask a question, child responds. That's the end of the conversation. However, thick conversations are when we're extending those conversations so that the child is giving more than one word or two-word responses, and two, that we're engaging in multiple back and forth with our child. Some researchers call this a strive for five conversation, meaning five back and forth, meaning an adult asks a child a question, a child responds, the caregiver or adult then responds back to the child, either affirming something the child said or extending upon what the child said. And then the child can answer kind of in extension of the question. And then the adult can affirm the child again. So really, we know that most conversations are only two back and forth or three back and forth, but to really improve upon our child's oral language, those five back and forth are really going to help. So that's what we think of when we think of thick conversations. And that also gets our children ready with having conversations when they go to school, when they're in school, and ultimately in their own social interactions. It also supports children's complex thinking because they have to think a little bit faster and that they have to stay on the same topic longer, which we know with students, especially in that kindergarten, first grade period, they like to hop around, jump around, and kind of staying in that connected conversation allows them to engage in that really deeper thinking. And it also increases their vocabulary because they're hearing the vocabulary that you as caregivers are giving them, and they have to, then kind of use it or express it in their own language.
Victoria, did you want to share these slides while you're talking about them, or just in the chat?
Yes.
Okay.
So I can put them in the chat again for everyone.
Did you want to share your screen so that people can follow along, or that's totally up to you?
Oh, I thought I was sharing. My apologies.
No problem. I see some people did get the link that you had sent before, so they are in the presentation, but it might be easier.
Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, thanks. I can't see it, which is interesting. Sorry about that. I don't see that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And so when we're thinking about strategies and talking with your child, we think about those WH questions, those who, what, when, where, and why. And they're good just to kind of continue to ask your children because that's also priming your children for when they're going to be seeing these questions, when they're engaged in reading and responding and writing. Again, kind of repeating part of what your child said or all of what your child said to affirm. One, to affirm what they said, but two, to also let them hear what they said again. So they are hearing more language, getting more input. And finally, giving new information about a topic. As we know, children are so inquisitive and curious, so they love to hear more information. So the more information you can explain to them is always the better. And now, when we're thinking about oral language, we have these wonderful resources. Some are from our own NCIL, as well as from the National Center on Quality Teaching and Learning and the National Center on Family, Parent, and Community Engagement. And these are linked in the slide deck, so you're welcome to look at them. Some are just brief infographics, as the one I have linked here from NCIL. And it just, I love to look at them because they always give me new ideas of different activities I can use with young children or different games I can play. And so we'll have resources linked at the end of each of our subsections for you to, kind of engage with or browse through on your own time to continue this learning. Since we've discussed the importance of developing your child's oral language, now we want to kind of transition into how we connect that oral language eventually into print, but first into speech sounds, how we get students to see that oral language is made up of parts and then individuals. And one key aspect of this is to support children in understanding speech sounds can be mapped to words and sentences. And learning how speech can be broken into parts lays the foundation for breaking up smaller parts in speech. So kind of like the first step is showing students how sentences can be broken down into individual words. For example, you can say a sentence out loud to students and start to say it slowly, and then have students try to clap or tap or count even the number of words in the sentence. For example, you could say to your child, the boy ate 2 pieces of pizza. And then you could say, clap with me. How many words? The boy ate 2 pieces of pizza. Oh, I counted 7. And it's getting students to see that words that when we speak, they're broken up into distinct words, that it's not just one long stretch of sound. And that's the first step for students to really understand. You can do this in any language in which you are most comfortable. It does not have to just be English. Doing it in your home language or any other language will still support students in developing their biliteracy and multiliteracy skills. So that's a great question. And you can work with students to count it, clap it if they, don't get it correct the first time. It sometimes does take a little bit of time for students to understand like the concept of a word, but really having them see how words are separated by almost like breaths, that we pause at points. Once your student has that down, you can then start talking about how some words, especially our bigger words, can be broken down into smaller parts. We often call this compound words, where there are 2 words where each part of the word is its own standalone word. And these are really fun for students. Students love compound words. And so, for example, you can show students how you can almost like add them together. And all these things, they also help your students' basic numeracy skills as well, counting words, breaking parts up into 2. They can add parts of words together. So you're building their early numeracy skills as well as their literacy skills, which I like. For example, in this little vignette, as a caregiver, you can say, okay, sometimes when you put 2 words together, they form a new word. For example, I have straw and I have berry. When I put them together, I have strawberry, strawberry. And the same thing, you can do it. What if I put book, shelf together? Book, shelf, bookshelf. And then that's kind of a part A, and a part B can be what we call word deletion, which you're taking away part of a word, a bigger word to get a smaller word. So you could say, for example, if I have cowboy, what happens if I take away cow? What's left? Boy. Cowboy, take away cow, I have boy. And these are all great games to be playing with kids. They love them. It's like a big game to them. And you don't need any other materials with you. It's just a conversation you can have. Once, you feel like your child is kind of, getting really good at that, mastering that, you're going to want to start thinking about how you can break larger words up into syllables. And a syllable is a part of a word that has one vowel sound. I also like to describe it as one breath of air. And the best way you can understand how many syllables a word has is by putting your hand under your chin and feeling each time your chin drops. For example, vowel. My chin dropped twice so that I know it has 2 syllables in it. Sometimes we ask students to clap out the syllables, and that can sometimes get really dicey because our children, they get so excited that they start just clapping away. And then you say, how many syllables were in that word? And they go, umbrella, and they get excited. But with the hand underneath the chin, they're able to more really physically feel how many syllables there are in a word. So, for example, you could say, how many words are in umbrella? Umbrella. 3. You can see my mouse move. You can even model it for them. Watch my mouse go down. Watch my chin go down 3 times. Now you try it. You can also tap it, but I do really like the hand underneath the chin as the best part for our children. I've also linked here some syllable games you can play with your children from the Reading Rockets website. It's a wonderful website that has a lot of great other resources, but I do like their syllable games on their website too, if you want to play with your child. So we've talked about larger kind of like larger words, parts of words. Now we want to drill it down a little bit more advanced to getting into those individual sounds and helping your child identify those individual sounds in words, but not only that, how then they connect to print, so to our letters. We call that the alphabetic principle, when students can identify that an individual sound maps onto a letter or group of letters. And that's really the key, the first key to decoding or reading words. So this is a really important step for students. And this can really be done when children understand the sounds each letter kind of makes. And just in the essence of time, I'm not going to play these videos that go over each sound, but we have our vowels and our consonants. And one way that I like to tell students to differentiate vowels and consonants is that vowels are singing sounds. I can sing all the vowels. I can sing, it goes on and on and on. It's not a stop. As opposed to a consonant such as or d, or my mouth stops, my mouth closes. But with a vowel, I can keep singing it on and on. And with our vowels, each of our 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, and U, they each make 2 sounds. They make their short sound, which is the most common sound that they make in our language, such as A, E, ah, and and then they say their long sound, which is their name, A, E, I, O, and U. When I'm teaching students with short sounds, I always like to use those kind of hand gestures or what we call kinesthetic cues to help students, like I'm eating an apple, like I'm itchy, like I'm singing opera, and then like I'm going up, up, up. And with our consonants, we just want to make sure when we're working on them with students and when we're sounding our consonants out, we're not adding that sound at the end of them, like buh. That's what we call the schwa. And that kind of adds that vowel sound with students. And while we might not think that that's bad, it shows up in students' reading, in their, struggle to read, but especially it shows up in their spelling. For example, if a student's writing, lock, sometimes they'll say B, they'll spell it B-U-L-U-O-C-K. So they'll add some other letters in there because they're adding that extra sound after those consonants. So we want to make sure we clip the consonant sounds like or with our students. And I always have to check myself too because it's very hard. It's very hard to clip the sounds. I have to be very intentional about that. And additionally, when we're reading words with students, when we're helping them map the sounds to the print and vice versa, what they see to sound it out, we want to try to stretch the sounds and connect them as much as possible. This is what we call continuous blending. For example, I'm not having students, when they see the word sun, I'm not having them say, no. It's harder for them to keep all those sounds in their working memory at this point. It's easier if I say, blend this with me. Sun. That's what we call continuous blending, is holding the sounds in our head as much as possible. For example, with this example, with the word man, asking the child, how does the word start? And man. And it helps the child hold all those sounds in their working memory and ultimately blend the word together. After your child connects these sounds together, you want to ask them, does the word, that they just read make sense? Because then they might have to go back and correct a sound that they hear. This is different. You may have heard a little bit about balanced literacy, the 3 cueing, which we're trying to get away from, as a reading community. This is different because that type of stuff happens. We ask those kind of prompts we ask children to do before they read a word, which was more led to guessing. This is after, as like self-confirming and at trying to give them meaning making. They've already blended the word together and decoded the word, and now we're trying to ask them if they know the word to build up their schema, their vocabulary, and ask them to connect it to what they already know. And it allows them as a double check to make sure that they sounded out all the words right. If they're reading a word and they're able to blend it and read it, but they just don't know what the word means yet. For example, maybe they blended the word jet together, jet, and they say, what's a jet? I don't know what that is. That's a great opportunity to build their vocabulary and say, a jet is like an airplane. It's usually a smaller airplane. And now they're building their knowledge of the world too by identifying that word. These are, again, some resources to help your child in sounding out words. Again, this kind of keep your child's engine running, where it's helping you with that continuous blending, how you stretch out those speech sounds to ultimately blend the word together. So there's a few route to readings here and helping to read words by blending. Now we get into the fun stuff, which is we've talked about oral language, we've talked about helping students identify the sounds and how they connect to print. Now we get to talk about reading with your child. And this is really, it's one of my favorite things to do, but it also can be so fun, and it can be so important. Reading with your child helps your child learn new words and ideas. It helps them understand the purposes for reading. It allows them to hear what a fluent reader, such as yourself, sounds like. It helps them develop their thinking and problem-solving skills. And overall, it just helps them develop a love and enjoyment for reading and for learning about the world, too. So when we talk about reading with your child, reading can promote their development. And we're just going to watch a short video, if we can, by Dr. Jean Wanzek, and how you can support your child's literacy development at home. So I'm going to click on this video and let's see it. Let's hope it connects. Okay, thank you for letting me know that you cannot hear. That is great. I'm going to unplug for a moment. We're going to see now.
Yeah, I think at home, it's really important to focus on your child's strengths as well as their weaknesses. It's easy when students are struggling or our children are struggling to think about their weaknesses, but really celebrate their strengths and do things that, continue to build on those strengths. And one of the most important things you can do is to read with and to your child and make reading enjoyable at home. And that can be, reading to them, reading with them, audiobooks, and really discussing that and making it enjoyable. Talk about the interesting words that are in the books, what the words mean, what's happening in the story or the information that's being given. What is the author trying to convey to the reader through this book or through this text? And really, having discussions with your child about books and really making it an enjoyable experience. And children who receive really good, effective instruction in school and find reading enjoyable become successful readers and can think critically about the text and really can thrive in those environments.
Okay. So I hope you enjoyed hearing Dr. Wanzek talk about that. And really, when you're at home, we really want to think about how we can stimulate that enjoyment and that love of reading, because your children are doing so much reading and learning at school. And maybe sometimes they're learning and they have this wonderful CKLA curriculum that has wonderful knowledge building units, and they might be really interested in a few units, but they might be going to school sometimes and they're not interested in every unit that they learn about. So maybe they're engaged at school in some reading and topics they're not interested in. So we really want to maximize their interests when they're reading and or listening to reading at home. And as Dr. Wanzek said, we want it to be as interactive as possible, where you can talk to your child about the books and engage with your child about the books and question and wonder, and just develop their love of learning about things. So here are some just few tips to think about when we're engaging our children in reading. And one is to read graphics, read the pictures, talk about picture books. You could even have a full book, which is just all pictures, and talk about it and talk about the narrative over time. You're building that story language with your child. If you don't feel as comfortable in your own literacy skills and you just want to talk about the pictures orally with flipping some pages, that's also great, because you're developing your child's understanding about kind of features of print and how narrative of stories go together. Also, identifying words that the children know, and pointing out words that they can read, that of words that they know the vocabulary of, but maybe they're not reading yet. And also, if you have, children who maybe, reading is tough for them and it gives them a lot of effort. For some students, audiobooks are amazing. They love listening to books and hearing. For students who are sometimes reluctant readers, we call them, or students who do, struggle with reading or don't like reading as much, the ability to listen and hear a story really captivates them and provides an alternative to reading the books visually. So diversify, how you're reading books with children. There's no just one way to do it, and they all are beneficial for children's literacy development. Another tip is to read both fiction, so narrative books, and nonfiction, so informational books with children, and having that really mix of the two different types of books. So when we think of fiction, we think of stories, narrative. Often they're made up chains of events. Think of our fantasies, our even nursery rhymes, our fairy tales, and young children love them. And while our informational material, our nonfiction texts, they tell facts about the world. And these two different types of texts have different features. They have a different type of structure in how they're written. And so by exposing students to both of these types of text, you're giving them a wider array of input and a wider knowledge of those different features of text that are out there. For example, with stories, students are seeing the narrative of text over time. They're seeing how most stories have characters, they have settings or places in which they take place. They have like kind of a problem. And then most stories at this age, they have a solution to them too, or they solved the problem in some way. So when students read these stories, they see kind of that typical plot line of a story, and they're able to apply them to other contexts they're learning. And you might be able to ask questions to your child, such as like, what did the character do? Why did he do it? What else could she have done? And you could even relate it to the child. If you were in that story, what would you do? And these are different questions you can ask children as they're engaging in these stories or fantasies and so forth. Whereas informational material, their story, they are text about the real life, about the world, where students are gaining information about the world. And we often think as adults, like it's a misconception that we think that children don't like informational text because they're boring. But really, students love informational text. They love learning about the world. And they as we said before, they're inquisitive, they're curious, and they sometimes are drawn to informational text over our fictional text. A recent Washington Post article actually from this past May kind of surveyed children on what type of text they like more, fourth graders. And these are some quotes. The fourth grader said, "I like nonfiction because you gain knowledge. Then you can ask more questions." Fourth grade. Another fourth grader said, "Nonfiction is better than fiction because it has real helpful facts about life." So this just kind of dispels that myth that like children don't like nonfiction, that we just need to give them stories. They really like informational text. And the key is just to find what areas that students enjoy reading about or that they're interested in. Do they enjoy reading, something that comes from like National Geographic about animals or about the jungle or safari, or do they like learning about people or events? Disasters in the world, like hurricanes and tornadoes, or about, just places in our world, cities, countries. And you can ask them, specific questions about what they're reading, that are both text dependent, so based on the exact information they're reading, and also like inferential, like what they would do or what they think, for example, a question I have here, if they're learning about the desert, what would happen if you planted a tree in the desert? Thinking about that caused them to kind of extend that thinking. And finally, my last tip, and I cannot stress this enough, please read and talk in the language you are most and your child feel most comfortable. Your literacy in your first language, in your language, your home language, building literacy in that language will directly connect to literacy in English in a second or third or 10th language. And it's important for your children to see you enjoying reading and talking. So please, please, please feel free to do it in the language in which you are most comfortable. And I know Quincy is a community in which many languages are spoken, and it's wonderful and woven into the fabric of the community. So, you know, multicultural reading and literacy and biliteracy, multiliteracy is so powerful. And so when we're just thinking about reading with your child, if possible, finding that quiet, cozy spot so you can listen and engage in. And again, letting your child choose the book, because they aren't given as much choice when they're in school about what they have to read. Sometimes they're given some choices, but a lot of the time they have to read based on what they're learning in their classroom. So this time with you is their time to really engage in those self-interests. And, keep it fun. Engage in how your child wants to engage. If they want to kind of dramatically act it out, if they just want to listen and read, or if they want to read with you, anything to spur your child's interest and to make it an activity that's fun for them and fun for you too. And as you're engaging in reading, you want to think about helping your child understand what it is. So thinking about building their comprehension over time. So there are different ways, but the best way is just to ask questions. There are different types of questions, such as, again, answering those text-dependent questions that are connected to the text, asking those WH questions that are so important that come up for children when they're in school, and they usually have to write in response to them as they get up through the grades. And identifying, having them asking questions where they have to identify words or different phrases or meanings in a book that they're reading to help build their vocabulary or build their knowledge about the world. One strategy that I like to use when I'm reading with child, or just keep in the back of my mind, is this acronym called CROWD. It just helps you remember to vary the different types of questions you're asking when you're reading with a child. So it reminds me not to ask too many completion questions, that I need to diversify the different types of questions I'm asking. So CROWD stands for completion, recall, open-ended, WH prompts, and distancing. And these types of questioning, they kind of go from like most simple, most basic questions to ask students to kind of most complex, or building that student's most extension activities. So I'm going to show you an example of each of these using the very popular and very well-known story, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, one of my all-time favorite books. So for example, if we're thinking about C, if we're thinking about completion, you might want to ask your child to fill in the blank. And they don't need to see it, but it's something that you're speaking orally, and they have to respond in maybe one word or one phrase. For example, you could say, and the caterpillar turned into a beautiful, and they could respond and say, butterfly. So it's a little bit of like check for understanding to make sure they're staying with you and they're connected to the story, but it's also a way for them to be playful and be fun. This can be really nice when a child really likes a book and they've read it more than one time, so they know the story and they know it really well, so they know what's coming, and it can be a nice way to play with them. The completion, but the completion is, as I said, typically like one word or one phrase, and as we spoke about earlier, we want to increase that oral language, or like the amount, the quantity of responses. So we don't want to do too much completion. We want to extend the child's language as much as possible. And kind of the next way is to think about our recall, or our R, which is like that direct what happened in the text. Just having students answer specific questions about the text. So similar to the completion, but it might not be the exact language that's used in the text. For example, you might ask, can you tell me 2 foods the caterpillar ate? So the child would have to say, about the apples or the pears that they ate. And so again, it's typically the child doesn't expand, like the size, the length of the child's response might not be large, but it's a nice way to get your child engaged in the reading, and again, to make sure that they're understanding what they're reading. Our next type of questioning now expands it a little bit more. We're getting a little bit, a little bit more complex, which is our O, or open-ended. So it gives students an open way to kind of take the question. So for example, you could say, tell me about the caterpillar. So the student would have to describe the caterpillar. Maybe they'll use some adjectives, some describing words, saying the caterpillar was hungry, and the caterpillar got fat, and the caterpillar, caterpillar went to sleep. So they're describing the caterpillar even more. Or it could lead to more of an opinion question, where you're asking the student, why do you think the caterpillar was so hungry? So the child needs to give their opinion on why they thought that he was hungry. Maybe the child's just going to say, because he turned into a butterfly, and that's it. And you can have children who are that literal, or you could have children who are more, reflective, and they say, well, maybe he saw all that food and he was interested in it and he wanted to try new foods. And it's like when I try new food, and you can go on a whole long run with that. So the open-ended questions can be fun. Our next type of questioning are those WH questions we keep coming back to because they are so important. Those who, what, when, where, and why questions. And they can be either kind of direct, more of those recall-based questions, or more of those open-ended questions, such as what other foods might the caterpillar eat? Where does the caterpillar turn into a butterfly? The why questions typically lead to larger kind of responses than the other WH type questions. Then finally, we have our D, or our distancing questions. Now, this is where we can lead the child to make a connection to something in their own life. Sometimes we call this text to self connections. And, we can have a child say, like, for example, what do you think would happen if you ate that much? So they're having to kind of infer between what happened in the story and their own. So all these questions are really good to just think about when you're engaging with the child and thinking about the types of questions you're asking. You can also ask all 5 types of those questions before, during, and after you're reading with your child. Just think that, before reading, you're typically doing what we call previewing the book for your child, having them look at the cover, predict what the story might be about. You might ask some of those WH questions then. What do you think this story might be about? It might be a little open-ended. When you're during reading, that might be a little bit more recall or completion, where they're saying, what's the word? Checking in on word meanings again. And finally, after reading, this can also be where you have more of those distancing questions or open-ended questions, kind of like, how was the problem solved? Like, why do you think it was important to know this about the character or think about it this way? So it's kind of incorporating all those 5 aspects of questions at all times of reading. We also have some resources linked here to help you in thinking about different questioning to ask your child in the before, during, and after, as well as different questions you'd ask your child when reading fiction, so stories versus nonfiction or information. And finally, tonight, I just want to briefly touch upon how we read together with our child to develop their fluency, because this is really big, especially as we get into 1st and 2nd grade and beyond. We don't want children just listening and just decoding or just reading words, but sounding like robotic or being slow. We want them to become fluent readers, which fluency is the ability to read words, phrases, and sentences and stories correctly, so like accurately, with enough speed, so with a good rate, and with expression, the way we talk. And there's nothing that helps developing your fluency more than just reading aloud, than having your child read aloud multiple times, on and on and on. And I like to tell students that fluency is making sure you don't read like a robot, like we read like this, and not read too fast. It's not a race. we're reading so fast. It's reading how we to understand folks. And this does take time for students. But when you're reading together, you should model how to read with a steady pace. So you slow down for those longer or more difficult words, and you speed up when comfortable. Also, you're using kind of like that phrasing, how we talk. You're reading how we talk. And we can do that by making sure that the book you're reading with the child, if your focus is on developing their fluency, that's kind of at the right kind of area for your child, that they can read it. That's not too hard for them. Maybe that's a book that you're reading aloud to them, but that's an area where it's at kind of that, what we call lexile level, where they can access it and can practice over time. And allowing, your child to see you reading with, especially if there's characters in the story, you can read with a different type of voice with one character and read with a new type of voice with another character. It allows your child to see how print can come alive too when you're reading. And there are different approaches you can actually try when reading together. And so moving from your screen from left to right, they kind of provide your child with the most support to the least support. So if we're thinking about taking, I should say the least support to the most support on your screen. My apologies. So if we're thinking about our first option, you might have a book where you're reading one page, then you have the child read the next page, and then you read the subsequent page. Your child's not, it's practicing their fluency, but they're not necessarily hearing you read the exact same thing first, like as a model. So of the exact same words. So it's kind of building their muscle on that. Whereas our middle strategy, this is what we kind of call choral reading, where you and your child might be reading the same thing at the same time. And so it's a little less support for the child because they have to, it's a little more support for the child than the previous, but still not as much support for the child as the last example will show, because they're hearing you read as they read, so they can kind of work on keeping up with you or slowing down to your pace, whichever they're working on. But at the same time, they didn't hear you read it for them. Where finally on my right, this approach is where you read, say, a page or a passage, and then you have the child read the exact same passage you read directly after you. So this is the most support. This is what we call echo reading, where the child is literally echoing what you had just read. So they got the support of hearing you model as a fluent reader that passage, and then it's like their turn to read, and you can go through the text like that. All of these approaches are ways you can support your child with building their fluency. And just building reading habits of reading together regularly and engaging in fun reading story time can set the stage for building your child for fluent reading. And again, we have resources here on how you can be your child's guide to reading and how you can read things when you see them. So just to wrap up tonight, there are different ways we can support your child's literacy development. Think about listening to which sounds or letters or words or ideas seem hard for your child, as well as what they sound like when they're reading aloud, or what their fluency sounds like. Look for tasks that appear difficult for your child, or what tasks look like strengths to them, and work with them and see how they improve with practice. Also, as you're reading, just pause and give your child a chance to correct a mistake. Some of the best things we can do is let a child correct their own mistakes right after they've made a mistake, rather than us just giving it to them right away. But we can also prompt them to figure it out by going back and sounding out our words and making sure they're connecting the speech to the known sounds they have. And finally, just encourage and talk with your child about a book or another literacy activity, and offer praise to them whenever it's needed. I will obviously stay on the call for any questions you have, but I know that it's at the end of our hour together tonight. So I do want to, give you the time to head out if you need to. All of this information is part of one of our NCIL briefs and infographics on supporting your child's literacy development at home. So you're welcome to go to our NCIL website to do that. If you don't mind, we do have a survey that you're welcome to fill out about the session and the link. We take it very, we take it all, we look at all feedback to improve our own practice. And we are on social media. We have many videos for caregivers on our YouTube site, which is Improving Literacy. We have a Twitter, which we post, and we have a Facebook group too. We also have our website, which is just improvingliteracy.com. And I welcome you to look at all the resources we have for many different areas of literacy.
Thank you so much, Victoria. You've provided our families with so many great tips that I hope, will use with their children. I want to thank all of our families for joining us tonight. You can feel free to stay on and ask questions. We're here. I put a few things in the chat for you, that book raffle form, also the flyer for January 14th, which Victoria is going to join us again. We're going to do this, but expand on it for some tips and suggestions for if you have children in grades 3 through 8. And then lastly, I put the core program that we use in K through 5 is Amplify Core Knowledge Language Arts, and they have a caregiver hub that has a lot more information and can kind of help you familiarize yourselves with what your children are doing in school. So with that, I'm going to stop now. I want to thank you all again and thank Victoria, and we will stay, and you can unmute and ask us any questions. But have a great night otherwise.
Thank you all.
And I can stop the recording now, but we will wait and hang out if anyone has anything else. Thank you.